Rappin with ReefBum is sponsored by Bulk Reef Supply and Ecotech Marine. Hey, what's happening, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Rappin with ReefBum. I'm your host, Keith Berkelhamer. So today on the live stream, I welcome Andrew Robson, who is a reef tank hobbyist as well as a bonsai artist. An interesting intersection of hobbies and skills, and we will be discussing the art of bonsai and how that could be utilized for aquascaping and designing a reef tank. What's happening there, Andrew, man? Thanks for joining me tonight.
Hey, Keith. Thanks so much for having me on. It's a real pleasure. I'm a big fan of the show and really appreciate you having a conversation with me.
Yeah, no, this should be very, very interesting. I know aquascaping is a big topic in the hobby, and a lot of people are always trying to figure it out in terms of trying to get that scape right and do something unique and different. So we can kind of dig into that. For those folks that don't know Andrew, and Andrew does his own podcast for bonsai as a bonsai artist, so he's part of his own podcast. And give a shout out there, Andrew, in terms of how people can find this podcast.
Yeah, it's the Bonsai Wire podcast. So we're wherever you can get your normal podcasts, you can check us out. I'm a co-host with several other colleagues, and we have a lot of fun talking to people just like you do, Keith. So
the bonsai artists that are tuning in probably knows Andrew, but maybe a lot of the reef tank hobbyists out there might not know Andrew. And but he is an award-winning deciduous artist. Did I pronounce that correctly? Deciduous artist?
Yeah, my business is actually called Rakuyo, and that's a Japanese word for deciduous or falling leaves. Basically, think any deciduous plants that change color and drop their leaves in the winter. Those are the types of trees I specialize in.
Gotcha. So he's an award-winning deciduous artist in the American bonsai community. He completed a 3-year apprenticeship with Michael Hagedorn. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correct. Hagedorn. After graduating from Yale University, Andrew is the president of the Bonsai Society of Portland. That's Oregon?
Portland, Oregon.
Portland, Oregon, the largest bonsai club in North America. He regularly exhibits work at the Portland Japanese Garden and lectures at the Garden Monthly. Andrew, we just talked about, is host of his own podcast, Bonsai Wire Podcast, and regularly creates new episodes with the other hosts and prominent figures in that community. Andrew resides at his recently constructed garden. How do you pronounce that?
Rakuyo.
Rakuyo.
Yeah.
With his golden retriever Bailey. I've got a golden retriever too. His name is Wilson. Where he teaches and shares the art of deciduous bonsai. But before we start chatting with Andrew, I want to thank the sponsors for this show, both Bulk Reef Supply and Ecotech Marine. Appreciate them supporting the live stream, and I also appreciate all you folks out there that are tuning in as per usual. Please hit that like button so more people can find this live stream. And while you're at it, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, what the heck? Hit that subscribe button. Would really appreciate it. So, all right, I see a whole bunch of people tuning in there. Andy, what's happening there? We got Gray Bearded Reef Paul, moderator. What's happening there? Barry Goss Sr. What's up, Keith? How was your trip to see Andrew's little tank? Laugh out loud. Oh yeah, I had quite the interesting visit to Polar Reef, and I also visited Joe Muscat, Tusi Corals. So it was quite the Long Island.
You had some big trips coming up.
Quite the Long Island road trip. So yeah, check out the video I just put out there on Joe's tank, and the video I got on Andrew Sandler's tank setup. Tanks, unfriggin' believable. Unbelievable. So, man, all right, let's start by talking about the art of bonsai. I think most of us have an idea what it is, but can you kind of give us a detailed description what it's all about?
Yeah, absolutely. So bonsai is a Japanese art. It's been around for about 1,300 years, probably a little bit more. It came to Japan from China, like many things. And it's basically a way to have a little piece of nature in a more intimate way, much like a reef tank is. It's a way of connecting with nature, maybe taking some of the more beautiful parts of nature and having that close by. And so bonsai is basically just any woody plant. It could be a tree, a shrub, or a vine that you grow in a pot. or some type of container. It could be planted on a stone. It could be in a piece of steel. It doesn't really matter. But some type of containerized tree or woody plant that we use to make artistic shapes and forms.
So it can be any kind of deciduous tree?
Yeah, you can make a bonsai out of basically anything that grows in your front yard is fair game. It has to be a woody plant, meaning it has to grow and not die back to the soil every year. Otherwise, you can't kind of build off of that structure. But yeah, it's any woody plant, and it's not every woody plant in a pot is a bonsai. It's a stylized plant to evoke some type of artistic imagery. So,
Mike Andrews, I know Andrew through Bonsai Circles, and now I find out he's a reef hobbyist as well. Right, you're relatively new to the reef tank hobby, right?
I'm very new. I started the tank. This tank's only 5 months old. I got into the hobby about a year and a half, 2 years ago. My very best bonsai client in Austin, Texas, has a 8-foot, beautiful SPS tank. And so I got to see that tank from when it was kind of getting built into the wall to, thriving with nice colonies. And so that's kind of what got me hooked and into it. Him and I have this shared interest of really cool stuff, and then bonsai and reefing are definitely part of that.
So is that the first reef tank you've ever had behind you?
It's the first reef tank I've ever had. I've never had fish or anything up until now.
Wow.
And for me, I'm all about acropora. I'm a big acro guy. I could care less about the fish or soft corals or whatnot. I'm really into seeing how acros grow.
How has that journey been so far in terms of the reef tank?
It's been surprisingly easy, Keith. Mostly because of videos like yours on YouTube. It's been interesting being a beginner at something, doing bonsai for a profession. I've got to learn about how a lot of people kind of consume information. YouTube is like the second biggest search engine in the world after Google. And I definitely spent, hundreds or thousands of hours on YouTube trying to figure this out. So it's been fun to be kind of a beginner and new at something again.
Hey, Sonny of Reef Site. Yeah, he's right. This is a great topic. The two hobbies complement each other well. That is true. And I never kind of thought of it that way until you mentioned it to me, Andrew, in terms of you being that, having that as your profession, and also getting into a reef tank. So I guess there's a lot of different things that can apply, right? The aquascaping and the way the corals grow too. Yeah.
And I think, reefing is such a new hobby compared to bonsai.
Yeah.
I think people are just kind of beginning to explore some of the aesthetic applications for it.
Do you think there's that's a big potential base of reef tank converts is the bonsai community?
I think so. I was really surprised when I got into this, how many of my students did reefing. It's maybe 1 out of 6, 1 out of 7, something like that. It's not a small number. And I think it's something that's really cool. A reef tank is the coolest thing you have inside your house. A bonsai is the coolest thing you have outside your house. It's a nice complement. With bonsai, we're working more with plants, and we do a little bit less of that with reefing. But it's a nice complement for each other.
And you could also keep bonsai trees indoors as well, right? Or not
as
so
much as you see.
Oh.
Like if you watch Netflix or movies, you'll see like bonsai living inside. That's mostly not true. I have 0 bonsai inside right now and about 500 sitting outside.
Oh, good.
Basically, if it's tropical, if it's from an area that has kind of the same temperature all year round, then it can do okay inside. But most temperate plants that need seasons, need dormancy, need the outside temperatures.
So in Portland, Oregon, does it get cold in the wintertime?
It does. We trees go into dormancy. Dormancy is kind of triggered under 40 degrees for a plant. And so most trees get a really good dormancy all winter long here. So it's the nation's kind of capital for growing plants. Keith, if you go to a garden center in Vermont, and buy a Japanese maple, it was grown 20 miles from my house,
Wow.
and it was trucked all the way across the country. And so
for somebody, if I wanted to get into bonsai, whatnot, am I kind of out of luck because I'm in a very cold state in the Northeast?
no, I actually had a package arrive today from a guy who makes bonsai stands for me in your neck of the woods. There's a bonsai club in Vermont, a great little club. And so basically you have a little bit more challenge with winter protection.
Yeah.
But it's not too bad.
Andy's asking, what grows faster for you, acropora or bonsai trees?
Hey, Andy. Andy's the president of our local reef club, the Pacific Northwest Marine Aquarium Society, and that's a really great group. So shout out to the PNWMAS. But for me, bonsai definitely seem like they grow a lot faster. I think in the grand scheme of things, you can get a nice colony of coral in a much faster time than you can a bonsai. But on bonsai, I get 12 inches of growth multiple times a year that I get to play with, versus these little frags behind me are like growing in the millimeters. So in the long run, I think bonsai definitely are the longer form. But
well, we're getting some good. We're getting some folks that are really excited to have you on, Biggie. Yes, super cool guest to have on, Keith. And Brandon Scott Art, NSA Aquascaping is so zen. Yeah, that is true. So you mentioned you teach, right, classes. Is that kind of like how people can get into the art of bonsai? Is just taking classes, or can you do the same thing that you just mentioned in terms of watching a whole bunch of YouTube videos and doing it that way?
A lot of people definitely take the YouTube approach.
Really?
But yeah, and really what I found is that both being a student at reefing and being a professional at bonsai, you learn the most when you're doing something hands-on. Keith, I could watch one of your YouTube videos and I'm really thankful for them. And I could regurgitate 100% of the information, but fail 100% in the application when I go to do it myself. And that's the thing that videos can't really seem to get across. You know how to think about things, but you haven't had the tangible experience of doing them.
Yeah.
So with bonsai, it's the same. It's like you're going to learn the most once you have your hands in the tank, so to speak. And you're pruning the trees, you're wiring them, you're making mistakes. That's where all the learning is going to be.
And are there different levels of expertise in bonsai? I mean, do you have like a beginner level, intermediate, expert? Is there like a master level?
There is, but yeah, there's definitely different levels. In the United States, the way we kind of think about it is there's professional artists who do this for a living, and they do a lot of the top level work. But there's also hobbyists. We had a big national exhibition in California last year, and I won one of the prizes in that show, but a high level hobbyist won a few other prizes. So you're seeing really good work come out of both professionals and people who just do this.
I'm showing one of the videos that you had sent me with this. I guess this is your bonsai garden we're looking at right here.
Yeah, that'll be the backyard just right outside the window here.
So talk to us about what we're seeing here in terms of that hole. How many bonsai trees are in there? I mean, they look like different types of trees, and pretty cool, man.
Yeah. If you're walking around my garden watching that video, you're going to see mostly deciduous trees, like we talked about. That's the type of bonsai I'm really passionate about, which is a little bit unusual. Most people think of pines or junipers when they think of bonsai. That's what you're going to see if you see a bonsai on some Netflix show. But my backyard's something different. I like things that have a lot of change. And so a deciduous tree is going to have 4 really distinct seasons. So it will look different times of the year. I don't know which video you're showing, if it's the winter or the spring one, but
I'm not positive.
Are there leaves on the trees?
Yes.
Okay, so that's spring. So yeah, you're seeing in that video a lot of emerging colors, which are beautiful, especially on a lot of the maples and whatnot as they start to leaf out. You're seeing lots of different types of bonsai. Most of my trees in my backyard are deciduous, but within that, I have beeches and elms and hornbeams and maples and katsura and ginkgos and lots of different species. And they all have their little idiosyncrasies, just like corals do. And
so Andy's wondering, do you have disease and other issues that can wipe out bonsai trees that, like what we have with Aquapora?
we do. It's maybe not as catastrophic, or doesn't feel as fragile, but with disease and pests with plants, they tend to affect a weak tree. So if you have a tree that's sick in the garden for some reason, that's the one that all the bugs and the fungus is going to, and the pathogens are going to kind of direct their targets to. They take advantage of the weakness. And so if you do a lot of things to keep them healthy, I suspect it's probably the same with corals. If you have a healthy coral, it's probably less likely to get affected by different things.
What kind of?
But yeah, we definitely fight them.
What kind of treatment options do you have?
Yeah, it depends. You know, if you're doing bonsai at a really high level, if you see some type of fungus or bacteria or something on the plant, oftentimes we'll cut it off, send it to a lab, have it analyzed, and really apply a real targeted chemical that's known and to treat that, rather than just kind of throw some stuff at the fan and hope it works. Especially if it's a really high dollar tree.
What are these things? And that was Andy's next question. Andy's very inquisitive tonight. He's wondering about the price of the bonsai hobby compared to the price of the reef keeping hobby. But yeah, I mean, let's start with the with the bonsai trees themselves. Are those pricey depending on which trees, I guess, you're keeping?
They can be. You know, the average tree in my backyard is a pretty high dollar value.
Like what? Do you mind sharing what that?
Yeah, it's, you know, probably in today's market, the average tree in my backyard is $6,000 to $8,000.
Wow. Wow.
But it's just like a coral, right? Like, you know, you can buy a frag for $100. You can buy a nice big colony for a lot of dollars.
So you've grown those from little trees, I guess, little seedlings.
Yeah, there's different starting points. You can start bonsai as a seedling and grow it from a very young thing. You can go collect something that has more momentum from nature, if you can find some stunted but big trunk, interesting tree. So there's a lot of different ways that you can kind of start a bonsai. You can go to a garden center, buy a Japanese maple that's 8 feet tall and cut it down to 2 or 3 feet and kind of play with that. There's lots of different starting points that you can kind of tackle. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. You know, the average tree in my backyard is pretty expensive, but the nice thing about bonsai is you can just start with a seed and grow your own. It's just the money is time.
Interesting.
So if you want a prize-winning tree, you're going to pay for 30 years of somebody's work, blood, sweat, and tears.
Oh, that makes sense. Just like you know, an Aquapora, if you grow a big you know, into a colony, it's going to have to be worth more than just a little frag. That's for sure. What about so you've got the sun, obviously, that's powering. Providing a lot of the energy for those trees to grow. But what else do you need? I'm assuming there's some sort of nutrients that you've got to constantly feed the trees.
Yeah, and it's funny. In reefing, it seems we're always trying to get nutrients out, and bonsai, we're always trying to put nutrients in. And so we tend to use soils that are inorganic. And we could have a long conversation about why that is, which we don't need to for this podcast. But we use inorganic soils, things like pumice, you know, volcanic sand, volcanic clays, that don't have a lot of nutrition in them already because they're more sustainable for a long period of time. And because we use those soils, we have to supplement with a lot of nutrition. So we're always adding, you know, different things. We actually use fish emulsion, which is basically a fish smoothie. And one thing I even want to experiment with is maybe taking some of the waste from the protein skimmer and maybe diluting that down and trying to fertilize with that. I'm going to try that on a test tree next year, a low dollar.
That'll be cool.
Test tree.
That'll be cool. But, yeah, don't use one of those $6,000 or $7,000 trees for that test.
No. We're going to use a seedling for that. But yeah, trying to think of ways to do that.
So I'm going to show the video of your tank right now, and it's really very minimal aquascape, but obviously there's the art of bonsai that's incorporated into that. So at what point, I mean, when you said to yourself, all right, I'm going to have a reef tank, did you basically just like say automatically that I'm going to put a bonsai aquascape in there, you know, a very minimalistic thing that's going to be similar to what I'm doing in terms of my profession?
Yeah, you know, I actually don't even think of this as a bonsai aquascape. I just think of it as kind of basic aesthetics. So I knew like I wanted um, some type of asymmetry. So I have a big rock structure on one side and a smaller one on another side. I also knew that, you know, for everything crazy I could do with my aquascape, thinking long term, you know, this is just going to get covered with corals in the future. So how crazy can I really get? But maybe the biggest influence that Bonsai had on the aquascape was actually thinking about light and how, you know, with photosynthetic organisms, be it coral or bonsai trees, you know, we're limited on how light creates the structures that we grow. You can basically only have a triangle. You can't have anything besides that because light has to penetrate the bottom parts as well as the top parts and keep everything kind of alive through the photosynthetic process. So I tried to think about that as I was building my scape, thinking, you know, how is light going to hit this? How is, you know, is it going to keep the corals happy? And I knew the corals were going to add a lot of mass. You know, being a bonsai artist, I'm maybe a little bit better at seeing the long term. And so I was trying to think, what is this tank going to look like 7-10 years down the road?
Yeah, that's
And so
that's a good approach. So, Paul, Great Bear Reef, I'm going to have to rewatch tonight when I get home, planning a bonsai scape for the new build. Big ES. Question is, any unique aspects that cross over between the bonsai hobby to the reef hobby?
I think there's a lot of them. You know, they're both basically containerized life, right? One way to think of bonsai and I think reef keeping is, you know, it's an intersection between nature and culture. We're obviously taking the best parts of the reef and kind of showcasing and celebrating that. You know, the flashiest corals, the most interesting fish. Bonsai is very much the same. It's not fully natural. There's no way that this thing in my living room, powered by all this equipment, is going to be anywhere near something natural. But it's kind of this intersection. It's kind of meeting halfway between nature and kind of humanity. And I think that's the biggest kind of similarity between the two.
Yeah, you know, it does just seem to be you know, so intertwined because the craze in terms of aquascaping the last number of years has been that minimalistic aquascape, and you know, having that you know, the I guess Bulk Reef Supply coined the phrase, or maybe they didn't. I can't recall if they did or did not, but the NSA, the negative space aquascape. So Sonny from Reef Sites is asking, so how important is the use of negative space on your system, and can you describe the thinking behind the design?
Yeah, I'll first say that my aquascape is probably wrong in a lot of ways that I can't even describe, because I'm still a beginner at this, right? I still don't really know what I don't know, but you know, I knew flow was important with Acropora, and I had the goal from the beginning I was going to have mostly acros in my tank, and so I knew flow was really important. So I didn't want to just have a bunch of pile of rocks where flow couldn't get in between and everything. So that's what kind of led me to the NSA aquascape. I tried to do more of like the habitat style, like the Bulk Reef videos, kind of, you know, I think they did a second video with the HNSA.
Yes.
And so that was my big inspiration was those videos actually. And in seeing actually a lot of the Japanese reefs too, which are more minimalistic. So that's kind of what led to my design. It's not a good design. There's 20 things I would change about it if I could do it over. Now that I've actually had my hands wet and been in the tank for a few months.
Big ES says, I think the aquascape looks great. No, I agree. I think it does look really cool.
Thank you.
Andy's wondering, does bonsai present the opportunity for incorporating color into the aesthetic like an SPS tank does?
It doesn't. Color is not really a consideration. You get color by kind of happenstance in bonsai. If the tree happens to flower or fruit and that color is really nice, or if you come to my backyard in the next, from now until 4 weeks from now, you're going to see some of the best fall color on any bonsai garden in the country, just because I have so many deciduous plants in my yard. So you get it kind of temporarily, but it's you don't really see long form color. The best maybe comparison for Andy's question would be with the color of the bonsai pot that you put with the tree.
Oh, really?
That might be the more permanent kind of pairing. But even that's pretty loose and open to interpretation.
So you said, there's a lot of things you might change with your aquascape. I mean, I do agree. I do like the aquascape, but if you had to do it again, or if you started a second reef tank, what would you change in terms of what you did with that scape?
To me, the one side looks totally different from the other side. This one I have kind of more sculptural, structural. The other one I kind of just have these mounds with cavities in them for the fish to hide and play with. So I'd probably have a little bit more union between the two. I was, one of my favorite podcasts you did, Keith, was the one with Steve Wiest.
Oh,
yeah. He just kind of like shook my mind on so many things he said with aquascaping. One of the ones was, he said it's like dumb that people keep their aquascape so low to the bottom of the tank and try and not let the aquascape really go much higher, and so that's got me thinking I think I'd probably make a bigger aquascape. I also really like Steve is probably the one who has the most kind of bonsai like approach to reefing, because he works so hard to make it look natural even though it's not. So not seeing power heads, not seeing the tank itself, and so he's probably in spirit the most bonsai like aquarist in the hobby.
Oh yeah, he like you said, he doesn't want to have any visible pumps or equipment in the tank, and even his sump is like amazing in terms of the clarity and the cleanliness. But I'm not sure that's connected to the bonsai hobby or not. But is there are there certain things in terms of just organizational types of traits that are key to the art of bonsai, or I guess what are the key principles in terms of the bonsai art? I mean, obviously we all have seen, probably most of us have seen bonsai trees and they have a distinct look to them, but what are the main tenets in terms of the art of bonsai?
Yeah, there's kind of two main aesthetic directions you can go. And so if you look at the aesthetic spectrum of bonsai, you have something that's incredibly natural. So you have naturalism on one end, and then you have idealism, human design, human aesthetic on the other end. And most bonsai float somewhere in between on that spectrum, where you have something either very natural or very abstract in form. You can see bonsai that look 100% like it's just a tree cropped out of a landscape, and you can have bonsai that look like it's 100% doesn't look like anything that you'd ever see in nature, how that tree would grow. And so there is those two ends, and with bonsai right now, the current trend in the community is leaning a lot more towards the natural versus the abstract. So trying to create trees and make them look exactly how they look either on the mountainside or in the forest, or on the coast or on the cliff, something like that. And so the main aesthetic is trying to take this plant that's 2 feet tall, but it's naturally 80 feet tall, and try and create that type of imagery in a very small kind of precise form.
So what kind of advice would you have for folks that are trying to achieve, that kind of look in terms of the bonsai aquascape? Do you think it makes sense for people to actually look at some videos in terms of the art of the bonsai tree, or does it make sense to take a class that would help? Like I mentioned, Paul is going to be looking for a bonsai aquascape. What are some things that you would suggest to folks that are trying to achieve that look?
Yeah, I think study Japanese bonsai, traditional bonsai. That's going to give you the best kind of clarity. That's on that spectrum that we talked about, leans more towards the abstract. If you look at many traditional Japanese bonsai, on average, they tend to lean more towards that idealized kind of form. And that's the form that's kind of mimicked and copied within the reefing hobby. Whenever you see someone saying a bonsai aquascape, it looks like a Japanese black pine, Kuramatsu, very classical bonsai. So very triangular shaped. You have a trunk that comes up, you have some branching comes out, and you kind of plant your corals on that. Your corals are kind of planted on this trunk, so to speak, and they kind of grow that branching structure. For me, the weird thing about most bonsai aquascapes is they don't. It looks too much like a community rather than an individual. I think the real way to do a bonsai aquascape would be to just stick with one coral, just plant like 30 Oregon blue torque frags on one of those things and really have that grow. That would look much more bonsai-like to
Yeah,
me.
you know, I'm not sure if I've ever seen a tank like that. It's just one type of acro or one type of coral in the tank. I guess I've seen anemone tanks like that, but that would be pretty cool just to have like one species of acro, or one you know, type of coral in the tank and see what happens there in terms of the growth. Now, I mean, obviously in terms of growing out the SPS and the corals and all that stuff, is that like a whole subset of the art of bonsai in terms of like fragging the corals to have them, you know, try to achieve a certain look there?
You know, the only person I've really seen play with some of those ideas was Jake Adams. You know, he has this great YouTube video where he prunes a coral to improve its aesthetic. And
We just
you
saw some
don't
balloons
see
pop up in front of you.
I did. I don't know what that was. But thank you for whoever did that. But yeah, so Jake has this really great video where it's some type of stag, and it has this really long straight portion, and at the end of the long straight portion the coral starts to branch in a really beautiful way. And so he takes his bone cutters, he cuts out the straight portion, and he grafts the beautiful branching to the base of the coral to improve the aesthetic. And that's the thing that I'm really excited about with reefing is it feels like the hobby's gotten to the point where it's easy enough to keep these things alive. The information that we know is good enough to keep these functional. Now, how can we start playing with some aesthetic ideas to make these corals look better than they maybe naturally grow?
So, you know, like a tabling acro to me looks like a bonsai tree, you know, in terms of the way they can table out. And in my peninsula tank, you know, I've gotten a lot of tabling growth. So it, you know, at certain angles and in certain perspectives, it does look very bonsai-like, even though I had no freaking intention of doing that.
Yeah. To me, like the whole reason I love acros is the fractal patterns that they create look just like the twigs on deciduous trees when they lose their leaves in the winter, and that's maybe why I'm so biased towards acros. But to me, those different branching patterns and the variety of like the tables versus, you know, the stags versus everything else is kind of fun. What you're responding to, Keith, with the tabling acros is the pads of bonsai. So many abstract or kind of more idealized bonsai have these kind of big, exaggerated kind of pads of foliage. They look like these little floating clouds that kind of give the tree some artistic structure. So it's not just one big ball of foliage, but it has more detail kind of underneath. And a tabling acro looks just like those pads. If you look at like a Japanese black pine bonsai, has these big, beautiful pads of foliage. That's what tables kind of look like.
Eric Sarachin says when you mentioned that Jake was grafting or whatever he was doing, gluing frags on top of an acro, said that he does that with all his digis, and Jake inspired him to do it. So, yeah, I mean, you had mentioned to me when we were talking about this episode that Jake had mentioned the art of bonsai, and that's something that really should be discussed more often in terms of within the reef keeping community.
Yeah, you know, I've listened to both all of your podcasts and pretty much all of his podcasts. I love the Reef Therapy too, and on almost every other episode he mentions bonsai, which was so exciting for me. He's like, man, I wish I could interview some bonsai artists. But yeah, he had a really impressive mangrove tank. He's the first one to do like a mangrove tank kind of done right. And we can talk about mangroves a little bit if you want. But
yeah. I mean, when you say done right, what do you mean in terms of the mangrove? Just in terms of the aesthetics of it?
Well, mostly the function of it. Any plant that's going to grow in salt water is going to have to deal with that salt. And what mangroves have evolved to do is push that salt through the foliage. And so if you have a mangrove in your reef tank, you constantly have to mist the foliage with fresh water so that that salt is kind of eliminated from the leaves. Otherwise, the plant will just slowly die over time. And so I think he actually had this whole misting system where it sprayed, RODI water down and kind of cleared the leaves, the foliage from the salt. And so if you're having trouble with your mangrove, that could be why. Just take a spray bottle with some RODI water and just spray the foliage, once or twice a week. Because anything that's growing in that saltwater environment is going to have to deal with that through the foliage.
Right.
Well,
go ahead.
Something I'd love to do is actually do like a mangrove bonsai, like train it as a bonsai, but put it in a reef tank in the bottom. So I'm currently thinking about how to do that, but it's on my list.
Well, I'll tell you, man, you should be thinking about doing some bonsai aquascapes and make that a subset of your business, right? You could, as long as they ship well.
Yeah, I definitely thought about it. I do a lot of rot work in my bonsai work already, and so building an aquascape felt really natural. Kind of a tangent art form along with bonsai is called suiseki, and suiseki are these collected stones that the Japanese would find. They'd put them in these kind of containers, and they would evoke kind of a natural image. So many of them might evoke a mountain range or a cliffside or waterfall or something like that. And so the aesthetics of suiseki, which is, like I said, a really close tangent to bonsai, a lot of those actually apply more to the aquascape than maybe bonsai itself. So thinking if we want like a triangular structure, because we need to get light 360 degrees around from top to bottom, that basically necessitates a triangle. But if we have a symmetrical triangle, that doesn't look natural. So creating a triangle that has asymmetry, maybe changing the forward lean towards the viewing angle gives it kind of a better kind of look. So you can take a lot of these aesthetics from the art of suiseki, Japanese stones. A lot of those, to me, really applied well when building the aquascape.
What about there's a common thing out there that I always read through in terms of when I'm creating an aquascape. There's a what's it called? The rule of thirds is. Go ahead. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, the rule of thirds, or a lot of people will reference the Fibonacci kind of sequence. Basically, you don't want like the high point to be centered. It looks really good when your high point is either a third from one of the ends. And so that creates a really nice, pleasing image. Like I said, rather than have this perfect triangle, have a triangle that's maybe offset to one of the sides, to where you get a little bit more play. And that rule of thirds is kind of built into that. The peak, the climax should be about 1/3 of the way from either the beginning or the end.
Are there any types of dry rock out there in the marketplace? I don't know how knowledgeable you are in terms of all the different options of dry rock that we have at our disposal in this hobby. Are there any types of dry rock, any brands that that you know of that might be good to create a bonsai aquascape that would be easier to work with than others?
Yeah, I can only speak from my personal experience. I use Marco Rock for this aquascape, and I actually built another aquascape for a second tank I was going to put up. And so I really like Marco Rock because of all the fissures and whatnot. But at my local fish store, Cuttlefish and Corals, I'll give a shout out to Jeff. He's a great guy if you're in the Pacific Northwest and you need some fish. Jeff has the best shop here in Portland. But his wife does aquascaping business, and the thing that I really like about her aquascapes, she's actually getting pieces of coral and other, she's using both Marco Rock and maybe some branching and some actual coral pieces. So it has a little bit more natural flavor versus the one behind me is just all Marco. I don't know how sustainable that is, as it long term, everything gets covered with coral, how much detail you're going to see on some of that stuff.
Yeah. I guess it's the it's really trying to create the unique shapes and patterns, or trying to mimic the bonsai. I know I've seen some pretty cool aquascapes. Greg Carroll has one that was done by Joe Capriata, Unique Corals, that I think it utilized the two little fishy stacks. I think that's what it's called. It's really it's basically like little slices of live rock that just kind of get stacked on top of one another. So they're like just cut, and that makes it really easy to kind of like, you know, have overlapping edges and kind of things protruding out. So that kind of like strikes me as the type of one type of dry rock that might make it easier to create that type of look.
Yeah, definitely. I think Marco has several different kind of products in their line. I just used the boulders that you get from BRS and broke them up into pieces. But yeah, I think if I did something else, if I did it again, I'd probably use more variety of rock to kind of explore that. And I use both epoxy and the Marco kind of mortar. And so I kind of just tried a little bit of everything since it was my first time. And yeah, I like the Marco. It had a lot of nice flexibility to it.
Now, so, and I see that you've got a sand bed behind you in the tank. Is the sand kind of like that's got to be part of a bonsai kind of reef tank look there? Is that the zen of a reef tank? The sand, bare bottom, no good.
Yeah, you know, I think for the health of the corals and for the sustainability of the tank, from what I've read, bare bottom's the way to go. But
well, there's a debate
tank,
on that in the hobby. You know, so you've got your you know, you got your advocates of the bare bottom, you've got your advocates of the sand bed, but yeah, so that's a whole area of debate.
That's a whole thing. Yeah. But you know, I think the sand definitely gives it the look. It's annoying because you gotta clean it.
Unless it's got cyano on it, then it's not a good look.
Yeah, that's not a good look. But cyano on a bare bottom is probably not very good either. So yeah, I don't know. The sand gives it that naturalness. If you're trying to create a more natural image, definitely the sand helps with that. But I'm not sure it does very much else good from what I've seen.
I mean, what else in terms of like things that we can do? So I talked about my my peninsula tank, and that I have a lot of tabling acros, and it wasn't my intention, but I think it's because of the tank is only 20 inches tall. It's got a lot of flow. I think that's causing a lot of corals to table out. You know, is so flow, I would think, and the height of a tank could potentially come into play in terms of trying to recreate the art of bonsai in a reef tank. I guess I got a good a good example of that going on in my basement here. But are there things that you think can be done to try to like promote that look besides what I just described in terms of the height of the tank and the flow of the tank? Any other kind of variables that we could play around with, like light, you know, lighting, more focused lighting in certain areas to try to encourage certain types of growth in a certain direction?
It'd be weird, but you could definitely maybe. I've often wondered, like, it would look horrible, but putting like spotlights on the side, it would give you more flexibility in the structures that you could create. But yeah, I don't know, Keith. To me, I think a lot of the aesthetic potential is maybe how corals can be pruned and kind of worked over time versus maybe the equipment and how something can get set up. When Jake was doing that thing I referenced earlier, where he cut the ugly portion out and grafted the two beautiful sections back together, I think there's probably a lot of room for that in the hobby. Some of the other videos I started out with a lot, Coral Euphoria, Abe has this really cool mechanism where he can just move his colonies because they're on these pegs. And I think the aesthetic potential of that technique is huge because like Andy said, with colors, if you have 2 or 3 red corals together, maybe you can just move on and put in different colors. I think that gives you more kind of aesthetic freedom to play around with things. I'm not sure equipment will get there. I think kind of equipment, it's not that there won't be advances, but a lot of it will be kind of more imaginative ways to improve aesthetics rather than functional.
And what about the type of reef tank? You know, I noticed that you've got a peninsula tank there, and I mentioned I have a peninsula tank. Is that you know, something? And you can't see it in the way it's in the shot right there, but I believe it's an open top tank. You know, does that matter in terms of, you know, trying to create that bonsai effect with a reef tank in terms of whether it's a peninsula tank, straight, you know, tank without just 3 viewing sides. Is there anything to that in terms of the type of the tank that people are using?
Yeah, I actually found aquascaping for the peninsula a lot harder than aquascaping for the typical tank, because it has to look good. You need like a front whenever you're doing sculpture. You always need a front, but any sculpture artist will reference 2 points: that front where the viewer will see the image, and then the 3D all the way around. And both of those things are important. And that was the challenging thing about the peninsula is it not just only had to look good from the front, but from every side I was going to kind of look at it. And that made my aquascaping kind of more complicated, I think.
That drove me bananas in terms of, because my peninsula tank is the first peninsula tank I ever had, and I felt like I needed to really be happy with the aquascape in both sides of the tank. I wasn't terribly concerned about the viewing end of the panel, even though my tank is 3 foot wide, but I was trying to like get it right in terms of both sides of the main panels of the tank, and it was hard, man. I couldn't really achieve what I wanted to achieve. So the best side was the side that I see a lot more often than the other side. And it was funny because the corals was kind of like adapted to that aquascape, and so I feel like I got a much better pattern of growth of corals on the side that I aquascaped well versus the side that didn't come out as well. So that's that is definitely hard. It's you talked before about maybe you don't need to be so perfect with the design of an aquascape, because once you do it right in terms of growing corals, and the corals are going to cover everything up. But it's a tough thing, man. And I guess the question I'm leading up to is, at what point do you kind of like have to just step back and leave it alone in terms of the art of bonsai and the art of recreating that sort of artistic look in a reef tank? At what point do you just have to say, you know what, I can't just keep going over this thing and trying to make it perfect in my mind?
Yeah, I think it's important. It's definitely something you learn to live with when you're doing art for a profession, is being okay, kind of finding consensus with that stopping point. But the beautiful thing about both bonsai and reef tanks is that they evolve over time. And so, I don't necessarily have to place the rocks perfectly now, because I could maybe make edits as corals grow and as things change and as I live with it more. And I guess if you're sculpting an aquascape, you're putting things in stone, or mortar, so to speak. But you just being okay with that change, knowing that's the thing that I love about bonsai and reefing, is that continual change keeps it exciting. It allows for improvement, because we're not the only ones working on our tank. The corals are kind of working themselves, and so it's this kind of collaboration between us and the corals kind of over time. That's kind of how we think of bonsai, is it's a relationship with the artist and the tree. They each contribute, and through those sets of contributions, you get a nice product at the end.
Mark Hibbert is asking, how about backlighting the rear panel to give dimensions to the bonsai layout similar to freshwater planted tanks?
Yeah, interesting.
So I guess the use of light.
Yeah, I haven't played or thought too much about that, but that might be a kind of a fun, interesting way to do it. What do you think about that, Keith?
Yeah, I think that's tough, because then I think you need to kind of play around with the lighting and have somehow focus a light in a certain spot. But I guess if you have certain like spotlights, I know there are lights that can be directed much more in a focused way in a certain area than other lights that have a much lighter or larger spread of light. So, but I can see that being kind of cool, having kind of different spotlights on different parts of the tank. The only problem with that is that it's going to impact the ability to grow corals, because if you've got such focused light in certain areas of the tank. But I guess if you have light and then you put a spotlight someplace to highlight whatever spot you want to do, then that's going to be okay, as long as you're not you know, skimping on the light that the corals need to grow and thrive and do well.
Yeah. Yeah, it might also, if you have an open top like I do here, it might look kind of crazy to have all these different spotlights. It's probably better for people who have cabinetry above their tanks. But
Reef Exotica by Luis Aceves. Hey, Luis. Markibit, I did that with the frosted vinyl. Not too good. It peels. Need to get the ADA light screen. It's expensive, though. I guess there's a lot of different things you can do in terms of playing around with a reef tank and trying to achieve that that certain look. Hibbard.
yeah.
So,
you know, one tank that really has a cool, to me, a more bonsai style is, have you seen the Emotions tank? They're one of the most popular tanks on Instagram. It's the company's called Emotions. They're over in Europe.
Check it out.
They had it was a bare bottom tank. Now I think they're putting sand, but their aquascapes were super, super minimal, and they weren't necessarily bonsai shaped. They weren't tree shaped, but to me, they were more kind of idealized. They were more in the spirit of bonsai than the look of it. But it was super minimalist, super beautiful, super chic. It's a very editorial tank. So that one to me is really bonsai inspiring.
Yeah,
it's a fun one to check out.
Yeah, no, there are a lot of inspiring tanks. I know Sonny, who was in the chat before, I don't know if he's still watching or not, but his aquascapes are, I think, are bonsai-like, and I think it's also the growth of the corals that he has in his tanks over the years that really kind of has that look that a lot of people desire, and it's also about the cleanliness, right? We talked about this in terms of Steve Weiss and stuff like that, but you know, how important is it to keep the background in your tank? You know, if you don't have a peninsula tank, keep the back panel clean so corals can pop. I mean, that's got to be a big part of it, right?
Yeah, I would imagine. You know, the other thing I was just sitting here thinking too is one way you can definitely achieve more of that bonsai look is you know, if you think about how a tree grows, you have a stump coming up out of the ground and then it fractures into a lot of branches. So having a really kind of small, narrow base at the bottom is probably a good way to achieve that more kind of tree and branching kind of shape. And a lot of the successful bonsai reefs, I think, have that. They have a pretty strong but narrow base, and then things kind of flare up into that nice triangular branching pattern.
I got a coral that you should have, man. It's a I don't know, because I know I sold you some corals at one point in time, but there's a coral that I have. It's called the Seaquarium Unknown, and it looks like a bonsai tree. It's got very unique growth patterns. In fact, I sent Jake Adams a frag of it, but I describe it as like it's got like a long stem, and then it's kind of like almost like a tulip type of shape to it, and it's got branches that just kind of like come out of that one stem. On my website, if you go in and you check out the Seaquarium Unknown, you can see I have a video of all my the mother colonies of the frags that I sell, and you can see the mother colony on the website of the Seaquarium Unknown, and it looks very bonsai to me in terms of that kind of pattern. So, you know, and I think that's also another thing, an important thing to talk about in terms of how the art of bonsai translates to the reef keeping hobby. And it's not necessarily in terms of corals look, you know, this coral looks like a bonsai tree, or that coral looks like a bonsai tree, but I think it's also about not focusing on the colors per se of the coral. You know, if a coral is like a brown coral or brown turd or very nondescript, not like neon pink or blue or red or orange or something like that, but it's just kind of got a bland color palette to it. Those can be really cool corals because a lot of times those corals have pretty awesome looking shapes. So it's kind of like that the difference in terms of you've got the color the color palette aspect, the color aspect of different corals, and then the shape of the corals. And so I know that was one thing that Jake appreciated, was that just because a coral didn't kind of like wow you with its vibrancy in terms of the colors, if there was a coral that had a very unique, cool shape to it, then that was something that should be considered a special coral. I mean, everybody's got their own things that get them jazz and all that stuff, but I think that's an important point to talk about too, in terms of the shape of a coral versus the color of a coral.
Yeah, well, now I think the coral hobby is so pointed towards what's the most extreme colors, what's the most, crazy combination of colors, that having some more subtle colors, just like an Oregon blue tort, or, just more kind of less flashy corals, actually make the flashy corals stand out more. If your whole tank was crazy rainbow tenuous, it might look a little bit too much like rainbow vomit. and if you throw in some more kind of plain subtle, a lot of the old school corals in there, I think that makes those special corals more special and stand out a little bit more.
You should grow some branching digitata, some digis, and start hacking away at them with the, like trying to create a bonsai kind of look with the, because digis just grow very fast, and although I guess it's kind of tough to do that with digis because they're so brittle. But
Yeah,
just kind of I'm just thinking out loud here.
yeah. With bonsai, we take something like a Japanese maple, and we try and make that Japanese maple look better than it naturally would, because we're humans, we have a brain, and we think we know better. and and I think with the coral, that's maybe where we could go with aesthetics, is how do I make this colony? How can I, it naturally grew like this in my tank without doing anything. How can I, with the tools I have, with my bone cutter, with my super glue, how can I improve the aesthetic of that colony? Can I prune away some ugly parts, grow out some more interesting parts? I think that's where, as the hobby's getting to where these tanks are more sustainable, people can have tanks for longer, I think that's the kind of exciting direction where aesthetics can go in the reefing hobby.
What about the presence of fish? Obviously every reef tank has fish in it. I think I've never seen a fishless reef tank. But what about the use of fish to kind of complement the aquascape and the corals in the tank? Should we be thinking about, if we want that look to be, should we be thinking about small shoaling fish, or are there certain types of fish that might make more sense versus others?
Yeah, I think it's definitely, when I kind of did my vision board for the tank, I got all my fish together. I'm like, is this a beautiful color palette? Do I have enough variety of shapes and colors and whatnot here? So I literally made like a fish plan, almost like a vision board, to, see, I have a group of schooling fish, and tried to have some aesthetic beauty. That's kind of how I approached it. The challenge with a reef tank is most people only have one, maybe two. And so it's tough to explore different aesthetic ideas. Most people who have bonsai have, 20, 30, 40 of them. So they could have one bonsai that's doing this theme or this aesthetic. They could have another one that's doing something totally different. It's hard to do that with a reef tank, because I think the ways that we can be most artistic would be most limiting. The tank behind me here is just a collection of one of every 50 of my favorite different corals. It's a collection, not an artistic thing. I think the artistic way to do it would be to say, maybe I'm just going to have all blue corals, like most have a lot of blue torts and the blueberry bonsais, and just, have a more focused aesthetic. Maybe choose a fish that is a complementary color, so maybe yellow or orange to pop from that blue, and that's the artistic way to do it. But it's the most limiting, because there's so many cool things in the hobby, and all of us kind of, we all want a little bit of everything.
Yeah, because I've always thought that in terms of fish, that it's really would be very, and I've done this, to have a bunch of green chromis and a bunch of lyral anthias, just schooling fish, and that's actually, I think I've in terms of Steve Weist's tank, I think that was kind of like the what I recall seeing in that larger tank, the thousand gallon tank, which had kind of like that kind of look. And then there's other types of fish too. I can't remember the name of the cardinal fish. Is it a cardinal fish? They're all silver with blue eyes. Somebody could.
Oh, Yeah, yeah, I've seen
Someone could
those.
drop the that name in the chat. Appreciate that. But yeah, it just seems that that would be very very serene type of addition to a bonsai inspired reef tank.
Yeah, yeah. I think having a more focused, simple vision, not having just a collection of your favorite fish and a collection of your favorite corals, but saying, my whole tank is going to be this, and having a more focused theme. It's tough because it's really expensive to get a reef tank going. It's to explore what I get to explore in bonsai, you need 20, 30 reef tanks. And that was the fun about seeing Jake's studio, where he could explore a lot of those different areas. So yeah, I think being the most artistic is actually being the most limiting. Um, but that might make it fun.
NSB Reef says an infinity edge tank with a bonsai aquascape would be cool. And let me add to that, with a mangrove. That would be really cool.
Yeah, yeah. I kind of, I have this dream of making a mangrove forest, and so it would be like a forest planting bonsai. The mangroves would be 100% trained in the bonsai kind of aesthetic, but have the reef kind of down beneath. I think that'd be really cool.
Or even like
It's on my
even like a drop down tank. That
yeah,
would be really interesting.
yeah.
You mentioned what was the art of stone that you would mention before, Andrew, in terms of how
It's called suiseki.
Suiseki. Okay.
Yeah. And it's been complementary to bonsai up until about 30 years ago. Most bonsai people were highly proficient in suiseki, and most suiseki proficient people highly proficient in bonsai. But that, I think suiseki has a lot of aesthetic ideals that would apply to aquascapes, how to make an aquascape look good. Because not every rock that you would pick up, on a river is beautiful. You're looking for the exceptions, the ones that maybe have the asymmetry, the rugged textures, things like that.
Can that actually make its way into a reef tank in terms of that rounded rock look, that particular art of that you're talking about there? I mean, or is that just completely unnatural in terms of a saltwater reef tank?
It would probably be pretty unnatural. I also wonder if they would leach anything. There are different types of rock. Um, but I think a lot of the aesthetics are really applicable for people who are building aquascapes. Um, so yeah, I don't know.
Mark Hessel, the name of the fish is, I can't see the Zorami. Is that what it is? I'm thinking of something else, I think, unless that's a scientific name. Biggie, yes. What has been your favorite livestock, Andrew?
Favorite livestock? Oh, I'm all about the corals, but as far as the fish go, I guess. We have this diamond goby. My mom named him Dyson because he's just constantly sifting. But he's definitely the most fun, interesting one to watch. But I have probably the most beautiful fish is the male square anthias. Just like the small little brush strokes that he has on his fins and whatnot. He's a real beautiful fish.
So yeah, I mean, in terms of the intersection of the two disciplines, what I guess what would be your top 3 tips to folks out there that want to try to create the art of bonsai into a reef tank?
Yeah, I think having more of an artistic vision from the start. So
And what does that what
maybe
does that mean?
yeah. So planning. We talked a lot about planning your rock, but maybe even planning corals so that you don't have two similar textures growing next to each other. So maybe you don't want two milliporas next to each other. Maybe you want to incorporate different species, different colors, different textures, different growth habits, so that you can kind of create a more beautiful reef. Like I said, I think if you're more limiting, if you say I'm only going to have corals of one color or one species or something, you'd probably get, or just be minimalist. Say I'm only going to have one coral and one fish. I think you get a more beautiful aesthetic image. You referenced that clownfish in an enemy tank that BRS did. To me, that's one of the most artistic tanks I've seen, just because it's it's so editorial. It looks like just one piece of the environment. So I think just more artistic vision from the start, thinking about if you want more aesthetic of your reef tank, thinking about your fish plan, the different colors of the fish, how they're going to react with the different corals that you buy. Just having more kind of foresight when putting it together.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, anything else in terms of vision and planning?
Yeah, it's tough with a reef tank. I feel it's hard because with bonsai you're kind of sculpting and changing these things over time.
And
with a reef
it's
tank,
growing.
you kind of it's growing, right? With a reef tank, you kind of it's hard to change your aquascape, especially if you're like piecing it together with mortar and whatnot. It's hard to go back and change that after you've lived with it for a year or two or three. And so probably the best way to have an aesthetic tank is to have it not be your first tank. And like I said with my aquascape, I just, now that I've had a tank, I would probably approach it differently going forward, knowing what I know now that I've actually glued coral to rock and all that. So I might redo this one day.
Oh, that's always the fun part.
Might be a fun adventure. But yeah, I think just, because I don't think a lot of people look at the reef tank in an artistic way. I think it's more of a collection of really cool stuff in the hobby. And I think that's starting to change now. You're seeing a lot of tanks. I think even BRS is doing a lot more theme tanks, and they're doing 52-week series, which is kind of fun to watch. So I think that's where people can play with aesthetics a little bit more, is having that foresight from the beginning when they're setting up their tank, and having more themed, It doesn't need to be natural, because nothing about this is natural.
Yep.
But
one thing I always like to say in terms of keeping a reef tank is I also think it's wise to try to minimize the amount of times you're putting your hands in the tank to try to do things or try to attain a certain look. So I think that's the risk in terms of somebody that's trying to achieve a bonsai type of look, is like too much tinkering.
Yeah.
So I think also to kind of get back to, art versus science, that, lean on the science part and let Mother Nature do her thing. And, let nature take its course. I always find that the less I fiddle, the better things kind of turn out in the long term. And so that's kind of like, I think part of the art of bonsai too, is just kind of like trying to set things up for success. And obviously with the bonsai tree, you can do a lot of changes along the way, but not necessarily with a reef tank unless you're doing a lot of fragging, because mature reef tank, it's going to be tough to pull that rock out and to make changes. So I don't know, man, maybe there's a whole nother thing there in terms of like we talked about before, bonsai fragging, where you can try to do something on that end. But so I guess what I'm saying in a long-winded way is just don't fuss with the tank too much.
Yeah, don't. It's going to be a lot harder to fuss with once it's all put together and running and all that.
Yep.
But that's maybe one of the nice things about the aquascapes that are mortared together is you don't really have that option.
Mm-hmm.
If you're just stacking rock, you you have the good things that come with that. You can just take the whole rock out when you need to frag something, but it gives you maybe too much freedom to mess with it over time. Yeah. Versus my aquascape, I can basically just turn it. I can't do anything else to it.
There you go.
So,
all right, Andrew, man. Anything else that we didn't touch on that you wanted to mention?
I think we covered a good chunk of it. They're both really fun, exciting hobbies. They both share a lot of things. Containerized life. There's a lot of rewarding things between the two, and it's been fun to kind of explore that along the way. So
all right, man. How so tell the folks again how they can find your podcast.
Yeah, it's the Bonsai Wire podcast. You can get on it wherever you find podcasts. My business is called Rakuyo Bonsai. Most of the bonsai world kind of lives on Instagram. So if you want to see some cool bonsai work kind of being done, a lot of that is on Instagram. You can just find me under Rakuyo Bonsai.
Spell that.
I'm here in
Spell that.
R-A-K, yeah, R-A-K-U-Y-O.
Oh, there you go. You're wearing it.
Or if you just, yeah, I'm wearing it here. And if you just type in my name, Andrew Robson Bonsai, you'll be able to find me. If anyone's ever, bonsai gardens are really fun to see. So if you ever drive in through Portland, Oregon, anyone's welcome to come by and see the garden. And I guess by extension, the reef tank. So,
there you go. Yeah. All right, Andrew. Well, listen, man, this was a lot of fun. I appreciate you coming on and sharing your interesting perspective. I think there's definitely a lot of parallels between the two hobbies, art forms, whatever you want to call them. But yeah, hopefully we learned something.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Keith. And I got to try and get you to come on the Bonsai podcast so we can kind of do this from the other end of the spectrum.
For sure. Well, I want to thank Andrew again for being on the show. I also want to thank both Bulk Reef Supply and Ecotech Marine for sponsoring the live stream, and thank all you folks out there for tuning in. And also want to thank Paul, who is the moderator and the president of Boston Reef Keepers Society, Reefer Society. So please join and support your local reefing clubs. They're so important to this hobby. Also want to let you know that all episodes of Rappin With ReefBum are available as podcasts on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and Amazon. My next Rappin With ReefBum live stream will be next Tuesday, October 24th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time with Taras Pleskin, who is an aquaculturist. I think there's also another name that he uses. We'll get to the bottom of that. He's from Top Shelf Aquatics. He's the guy that does all the. He's the expert in terms of live feeds, phytoplankton, rotifers. So should be another really interesting show. If you want to check out the full upcoming schedule of Rappin With ReefBum, visit reefbum.com under the YouTube section. Until next time, be safe.